So today I'll be sharing a publication from MIT News. This was written by Anne Trafton from MIT News and published on August 19, 2024. And it says, MIT study explains why laws are written in an incomprehensible style. The convoluted legalese used in legal documents conveys a special sense of authority, and even non-lawyers have learned to wield it. It says MIT cognitive scientists believe the convoluted language of legalese acts to convey a sense of authority. Yeah, that's true. Legal documents are notoriously difficult to understand, even for lawyers. This raises the question, why are these documents written in a style that makes them so impenetrable? MIT cognitive scientists believe that they have uncovered the answer to that question. Just as magic spells use special rhymes and archaic terms to signal their power, the convoluted language of legalese acts to convey a sense of authority, they concluded. And in a study appearing this week in the Journal of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, the researchers found that even non-lawyers use this type of language when asked to write laws. Here's a quote. People seem to understand that there's an implicit rule that this is how laws should sound, and they write them that way, says Edward Gibson, an MIT professor of brain and cognitive sciences and the senior author of the study. There's Eric Martinez, PhD. He's the lead author of the study. There's Francis Mojica. He's a lecturer at the University of Melbourne. And okay, so that's it. He's also the author of the paper. Okay, let's see. Here we go. Okay, so casting a spell. Gibson's research group has been studying the unique characteristics of legalese since 2020, when Martinez came to MIT after earning a law degree from Harvard Law School. In a 2022 study, Gibson, Martinez, and Mojica analyzed legal contracts totaling to about 3.5 million words, comparing them with other types of writing, including movie scripts, newspapers, articles, and academic papers. The analysis revealed that legal documents frequently have long definitions inserted in the middle of the sentences, a feature known as center embedding. Linguists have previously found that this kind of structure can make text more difficult to understand. No shit. Legalese somehow has developed this tendency to put structures inside other structures in a way which is not typical of human languages, Gibson says. In a follow-up study published in 2023, the researchers found that legalese also makes documents more difficult for lawyers to understand. Lawyers tended to prefer plain English versions of documents, and they rated those versions to be just as enforceable as traditional legal documents. Lawyers also find legalese to be unwieldy and complicated. Gibson says lawyers don't like it, laymen don't like it, my mama don't like it. So the point of this current paper was to try to figure out why they write documents this way. The researchers had a couple of hypotheses for why legalese is so prevalent. Oh, really? One was the copy and edit hypothesis, which suggests that legal documents begin with a simple premise, and then additional information and definitions are inserted into the already existing sentences, creating complex center-embedded clauses. We thought it was plausible that what happens is you start with an initial draft that's simple, and then later you think of all these other conditions you want to include. And the idea is that once you've started, it's much easier to center embed that into the existing provision, says Martinez, who is now a fellow and instructor of the University of Chicago Law. However, the findings ended up pointing towards a different hypothesis, the so-called magic spell hypothesis. Okay, interesting. Just as magic spells are written with a distinctive language that sets them apart from everyday language, the convoluted style of legal language appears to signal a special kind of authority, researchers say. In English culture, if you want to write something that's a magic spell, people know that the way you do that is you put a lot of old-fashioned rhymes in there. We think maybe center embedding is signaling legalese in some way, in the same way, Gibson says. In this study, the researchers asked about 200 non-lawyers, native speakers of English living in the United States, who were recruited through a crowdsourcing site called Prolific to write two types of texts. In the first task, people were told to write laws prohibiting crimes such as drunk driving, burglary, arson, and drug trafficking. The second task, they were asked to write stories about those crimes. Okay, seems simple. To test the copy and edit hypothesis, half of the participants were asked to add additional information after they wrote their initial law or story. The researchers found that all of the subjects wrote laws with center embedded clauses regardless of whether they wrote the law all at once or were told to write a draft and then add to it later. And when they wrote stories related to those laws, they wrote it in much plainer English, regardless of whether they had to add information later. When writing laws, they did a lot of center embedding, regardless of whether or not they had to edit it or write it from scratch. And in that narrative text, they did not use center embedding in either case. And also in the narrative, so in that storytelling, they don't use center embedding in storytelling, is what he's saying. Okay. So, let's see. Okay, here we go. There you go. In another set of experiments, about 80 participants were asked to write laws, as well as a description that would explain those laws to visitors from another country. In these experiments, participants again used center embedding for their laws, but not for the description for those laws. Okay. The origins of legalese. Gibson's lab is now investigating the origins of center embedding in legal documents. Oh, they're going to go down rabbit holes. Oh, let's see what they'll find in those rabbit holes. Okay. Early American laws were based on British law. So the researchers plan to analyze British law to see if they feature the same kind of grammatical construct. And going back much further, they plan to analyze whether center embedding is found in the Hammurabi Code, the earliest known set of laws, which dates to around 1750 BC. There may be just a stylistic way of writing from back then, and if it was seen as successful, people would use that style in other languages. Gibson says, I would guess that it's an accidental property of how the laws were written the first time, but we don't know that yet. The researchers hope that their work, which has identified specific aspects of legal language that make it more difficult to understand, will motivate lawmakers to try to make laws more comprehensible. Efforts to write legal documents in plainer English date to at least the 1970s. That's not that long, just now. They want to change things after thousands of years. They want to change things. When President Richard Nixon declared that federal regulations should be written in layman's terms. However, legal language has changed very little since that time. We have learned only very recently that it is okay. We have learned only very recently what it is that makes legal language so complicated, and therefore I am optimistic about being able to change it. You go, Mr. Gibson. So here's that study. Interesting. Legalese. How about you grab a law dictionary and look up that word. See how they define it. That's all for today. Peace.